Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about something that trips up a lot of editors coming from other editing applications, and that's how to get in and adjust basic parameters inside of Media Composer like scale, like rotation, like position, because those editors are accustomed to working with those types of parameters actually attached to the clips, and it doesn't quite work that way inside of Media Composer. So in this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to the 3D warp effect, how you use it, and why it's going to become your best friend when editing inside of your Media Composer timeline. Now, as always, before we get rolling, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Video Guys. I love Video Guys. I love the fact that I can easily click on one of those links in the show notes below, head on over to their website, and find the subscription that I need for my Media Composer subscription renewal. You can use that coupon code of MC101 to get 5% off your Media Composer license purchase. And to be honest, it's just a very smooth and painless process. I also want to remind you that if you find these tutorials useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share them across social media. It really helps me get the word out there to editors who may be having some issues with Media Composer. Maybe they are just jumping in from another nonlinear editing application, just want to get up to speed. Helping me share these tutorials across your social media channels will really help get the word out there. All right, now before we get rolling, whenever I get emails from viewers that point something out that I may have overlooked or glossed over in a tutorial, I always want to mention it. And I got a great email from Michael F. about Lesson 12, Exporting Basics. And Michael says, "Hi Kevin, this is a great video as always. In fact, I've been enjoying the whole series. Just one thing I noticed is that on export, you left the video levels to scale from legal to full range, which if the footage you have been editing is broadcast legal, 16 to 235, it will make the QuickTime colors very contrasty as it will convert the blacks and whites to full range, 0 to 255. When exporting my cuts for clients, I always like to keep as legal as this will give the best reference of the colors seen in the edit. I do the same for importing QuickTimes if I know the video levels are legal. I hope you don't mind me reaching out with this. Just saw it and thought I would flag it." And you know what, Michael? I appreciate you reaching out with this. And if you don't know what Michael's referring to, let me show you. Now, this is only relevant when exporting QuickTime files from Media Composer. 99% of the time, I'm exporting MXF masters, then using an application like Adobe's Media Encoder to do all my flipping to whether it's ProRes or H.264 or whatever format I need to go to. But here's where that little gotcha will come into play. What I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate over to my timeline right here. I'm simply going to right click, navigate to output, and I'm going to come down to export to file. Now, like I said, if I'm exporting an MXF file, you'll notice that that option is not here. It's only relevant to QuickTime exports. So if I drop down my export as and I navigate down here to MOV or MP4, you will notice that if I scroll down here, right the way down right here to color space, you'll notice that the color space is set to the project's color space. However, when you are exporting, it's going to take the video levels and scale them from what is legal to full range. So if you happen to be doing your QuickTime exports from Media Composer, make sure that you do have this option here selected to keep as legal range. So this way there's no funniness happening with QuickTime. Again, like I said, for the most part, I stay away from QuickTime inside of Media Composer. To be honest, we've sort of moved past it years and years ago. Many editors still do use it. So if you do not forget to check that over here. And if you are aware of what is going on with your footage, if you are still importing it, if I navigate to import media, you will see in here, if I come to my options, I have the exact same option right here. So if your footage is coming in as legal, you can select that right here. Do not modify, treat as legal. However, if it's coming in from a 0 to 255, you can always make sure that you scale from full range to legal range to make sure that all of those video levels stay exactly the way that you need them to when working with them in your Media Composer timeline. All right, so let's move on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to this shot right here. And what I want to do is I want to start out by talking about clip-based parameters. This is a very common concept in applications like Premiere and applications like DaVinci Resolve. What is a clip-based parameter? A clip-based parameter is any parameter that is attached to the clip that you can manipulate without having to apply a third party, not a third party, but without having to apply a secondary effect to create that, I don't want to say effect, but to adjust those parameters. For example, scale, position, crop, rotation, opacity. Those are the common 5 that you're going to run into. Let's just make sure that was 5. Position, scale, crop, opacity, and rotation. That's right, 5 of them right there. However, in Media Composer, we actually don't even have that flexibility. What's important to keep in mind is that in a lot of cases with certain concepts of Media Composer, like when dealing with effects, the way that it's been set up from the beginning is really still the way that it is now. So as you'll see here, if I come to my shot and I step into effects mode, remember, that's how we're going to see any additional parameters that we might have with a clip. I'm just going to step into effects mode right here. We talked about frame flex, being able to adjust it by selecting the clip and adjusting frame flex here. You'll notice that I actually have nothing that I can adjust. I don't have any scale, any rotation, any crop, position, or anything like that. Anything that we're going to apply like that is going to be as an effect. Now you might be thinking, Kev, that's crazy, that's insane. To be honest, for Media Composer editors, that's just another day at the office. That is how we're accustomed to working. So the question is, which is the effect that you're going to use to accomplish that? Well, that is where our 3D warp effect is going to come into play. Now, what I love about the 3D warp effect is years and years and years and years ago, probably a good, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was only actually the Media Composer was only actually able to do this type of effect with a secondary hardware box that Media Composer editors called the pizza box. It was actually a third-party effect box that was basically the size of a large pizza box that sat on top of our desk so that we could do these basic parameter adjustments in real time in our timelines. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to hit Command or Control and 8 on the keyboard. Now by doing that, we're going to call up our effects palette. Now again, you'll notice I have some additional effects in here from third-party companies like Boris Effects, but we can get to our 3D warp effect one of 2 ways. You can simply navigate up to the search window up here, simply type in 3D warp, or you are going to find it in the blend category. Now what I'm going to do is just bring this window over a little bit. You'll notice that I have picture-in-picture and I have superimpose as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 3D warp and drag it and drop it down onto this shot right here. You'll notice that nothing has changed. However, now when I step into effects mode, you will now see, and I'm just going to close my effects palette here, that inside of the effect editor, we now have all of the parameters that go along with the 3D warp effect. And there is quite a few of them. You'll see everything from shape to corner pin to corner tracking to crop, scaling, skew, rotation, position, target, jump down here, shadow, trail, foreground, and there's just a lot of parameters to go through. Now, to be honest, sort of in my daily work, I maybe only deal with, 4 or 5 of these parameters, because in a lot of cases, depending on what I'm doing, I might use a third-party tool, only because remember, these parameters have been put in here since its inception of the 3D warp effect and really haven't changed much or been expanded on. So for example, if I wanted to do tracking, I'm really not going to do any tracking in here. Again, my own personal opinion, I will go to a third-party tool like Mocha, or depending on what it is inside of Continuum, they have built-in Mocha tracking. I will use Continuum to do any of that tracking work that I need to do because I'm a big fan of the right tool for the right job. Now, I do want to point out here that, again, like I said, there are a bunch of parameters that I use constantly: scaling, position, crop, rotation, and you can get in and access them one of a couple ways. What you can do is simply find the parameter that you'd like to adjust, and in this case, let's use scaling as the example. And what I'm going to do is simply twirl down scaling, and you'll now see that I have my scaling parameter set at 100, basically full frame size right here, ready to go. But let's say I wanted to get in and make an adjustment. I'm just going to come down to our talent here where she pops her head out, And maybe I want to zoom in on this, 20%. So I'm just going to type in 120 and press enter. And you'll now see over here on the right, and what I'm going to do is just switch my composer window to the single monitor just so that it's a little bit easier to see. And what I'm going to do is just zoom back just that you can see exactly what is going on with the frame. And you'll see up here in the upper right hand corner, I've also been told I'm viewing this at 75% just to give me a little bit of an idea of exactly what is going on in my timeline. Now, what is important to keep in mind is that when I got in and I adjusted that parameter, a keyframe has not been added. Now, how would I know if a keyframe was added? A keyframe would be added if I happen to see it right here, applied in my composer window, or as you can see right here all the way down, a keyframe has been added for every parameter inside of the effect editor. I'm just going to undo that because most of the work that we need to do if we were making a basic adjustment to this can be done without any keyframes being added at all. You'll see I just made the 100 or the 20% increase in the scale. What I'm going to do is simply come down to position, and I'm going to make the adjustment here. You'll see it's not exactly that user-friendly because, of course, you do have the ability to simply grab the screen and drag the image exactly where you want it to go. However, you'll notice that as soon as I did that, a keyframe was added for position. I'm just going to undo that here. You'll see if I do it the parameter way or the drag bar way inside of the effect editor, that keyframe is not added. The instant I grab and drag, a keyframe is. Now, keep in mind, if you're only getting in and making this adjustment and you don't plan on making any other adjustments to the shot, it can add as many keyframes. Well, I'm not going to say it can add as many keyframes as it wants, but it can basically add a keyframe if it wants because it's really not going to impact any of the work that I do down the line. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, though, is once I get it to where I want it, I'm just going to delete that keyframe just so I don't have anything there. And if I step out by pressing the Y key on the keyboard to go back into edit mode, you will now see that my talent pops out, zoomed in 20%, and there we go. Now, at any point, what I can always do is I can step into this effect to see what exactly has been done. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically what this is going to show me is what does this shot look like without the effect on it? So we can do that one of two ways. What I can do is I can just press the step in parameter like this, and you'll see there's the adjustment being made to the shot. Basically what it's showing me is the original without the effect and what happened when the effect was applied. Now, there's another way that we can actually look into the effect. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by simply double-clicking on the actual effect itself. And at this point, I can then see in to see if there's any other effects that have been added to this shot. In this case, there's not. But we have the ability to see in to see what's going on. And if we wanted to make an adjustment to an effect that maybe was applied underneath the 3D warp effect, we could do that right here. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that many effects will actually have a bypass button that what you can do is simply, like, for example, Continuum has this, where if you come in and make, parameter adjustments, you can simply hit bypass and it will show you what the before and after was. Inside a Media Composer, I always do it with just a bit of a step in and step out. You could remove the effect if you want, but then you're constantly, removing and undoing and removing and undoing, which can be slightly annoying. All right, now, you'll notice that I did grab that frame and then adjusted its position. Well, we do have the ability as well to get in and make other adjustments actually with the frame of the clip itself. And we do that right here, right down the right hand side with the widget tool. And you'll see the widgets have come up right now. What I'm in right now, if you'll see if I hover over, is the scale widget. And I can just grab this, drag it down as much as I want. I can then reposition it as much as I want, like such. And you'll notice that what Media Composer has done is it's added a keyframe for position and one for scaling, but nothing else. By me getting in and pressing the Add Keyframe button here, Media Composer assumes that I want to add a keyframe across the entire board. And to be honest, it gets a little bit messy doing that, so I'm just going to undo that. Because if, for example, I wanted to do a little animation by, let's just say, having our end frame be here and maybe our start frame be up here, you'll notice that as soon as I adjust the timing and make that change, that keyframe has now been added in there to do the animation for me. And the beauty part is that it hasn't made a huge mess out of the effect editor by putting keyframes everywhere. I now only really have to see the keyframes that have been applied when I made that position change. Now again, keep in mind that if I navigate over here, I can also get in and make adjustments to things like rotation. And remember, this is a complete 3D rotation, like such. All right. It is the 3D warp tool after all, so it is 3D. And again, you saw me get in and adjust the actual canvas size to get in and make it larger or make it smaller just to make my life a little bit easier. You'll notice you have the ability to add keyframes down here as well as getting in and actually rendering the effect from here if you happen to need to do that. Now, let's talk a little bit about a situation that's very common that you might run into, where let's say you've had to bring in a project from the past, or I've seen editors that still do not like using the 3D warp tool. They prefer to use something like the picture-in-picture effect. All right, so let me show you how that works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this effect. I'm just going to hit F5 on the keyboard, and let me show you how this effect works. What I'm going to do, again, Command or Control and 8 to call up the effects palette. I'm going to grab picture-in-picture. I'm simply going to grab it and drag it and drop it back down onto our shot. You'll notice that the first thing that the effect does is take our frame and drop it down to 50%. Now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to step into effects mode. My shortcut Shift and Y. You can always find effects mode right here across the top of your timeline. And you'll notice that I do have a few parameters in here like border, like foreground, adjusting our levels of our shot, scaling, position, and cropping. Now, again, you'll notice that all of these parameters are available to you inside of 3D Warp. But more importantly, what I want to draw your attention to is right down here in the lower right-hand corner, because we're not going to talk about any of these parameters because we've pretty much already talked about them inside of 3D Warp. So what you have the ability to do right down here in the lower right-hand corner is say, well, you know what? I really don't need this to be the picture-in-picture effect. I'd really like it to be the 3D Warp effect. And any parameters that were adjusted inside of the picture-in-picture effect will now carry over into the 3D warp effect as well. All right. Now let's take this concept one step further. Now this is going to be specifically for Windows editors or editors who can still use the old title tool on the Mac. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to remove this effect. I'm going to create, actually I already have a new video level, so I don't even need to create a new video layer. And what I'm going to do is simply navigate up to clip, and I'm going to come down to new title. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a new title with the standard title tool. All right, there we go. I'm just going to call this, doesn't even matter. This is a title. All right. And what I'm going to do is just give it a bit of a drop shadow here. Again, we're not going to worry too much about the title tool because we're actually going to do a masterclass on titling coming up probably in a couple weeks. And what I'm going to do is simply just place this up here, and I'm just going to close it. I'm going to say save. And I'm going to save it into the sequences bin just because I'm going to delete it. I would actually put it where it needs to go inside of graphics, but like I said, we're going to be deleting that shortly. And all I want to do is just drop this into my timeline up on video track number 2. There it is. All right. Now, much like we had done before, what I'm going to do is press Shift and Y to go into effects mode. And you'll notice that I have some basic parameters in here, like scaling, okay, like position, okay, like crop. Let's just crop this all the way over here on the right. There we go. See you later. But more importantly, much like we had with picture-in-picture, if you take a look down here in the lower right-hand corner, I can actually promote this title to 3D and have all of the parameters that we just had before. We can actually turn that widget on here, and we can now rotate this title just like we had done before. We can get in and do corner pinning, all kinds of stuff. Anything that's supported inside of the 3D warp effect is now available to us as a 3D title by simply promoting it from the standard Media Composer title tool to a 3D title tool utilizing the 3D warp effect. So this has just sort of been a little bit of a primer on the 3D Warp tool, and we're going to be going a lot more into this tool as we're working. We need to get in, we need to crop certain things when we're talking about vertical video, when we want to set up a cool little vertical video look inside of Media Composer. And the 3D Warp tool is really an effect that you're going to go to constantly in your day to do basic things, scaling, crop, rotation, position, opacity, those type of alterations that you may have had access to as clip-based parameters inside of other applications. But for you inside of Media Composer, the 3D Warp tool is going to become your new best friend. All right, now that's a good place to wrap up. And as always, before we end, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Video Guys. As always, if you're looking to renew that Media Composer subscription, don't forget to check out the show notes below for links to those popular Media Composer subscription options. And I also want to mention that there are a lot of times throughout the year that Video Guys do offer sales. There's actually one going on as of this recording where you can actually save 20% off a Media Composer subscription. So don't forget to check them out. Use that coupon code of MC101 to get your 5% off. And please, if you found this tutorial useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it across social media to help me get the word out there to editors that might be looking to get up to speed in Avid Media Composer. And last, if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. Thanks a lot for watching.